Okay, so yesterday we had started the Painted Door by Sinclair Ross. Just gonna sneeze really quickly. Excuse me. Thank you for your blessings. Okay, so we started on the Painted Door by Sinclair Ross, and so we have our little plot summary up on the board over there. But basically, just to kind of summarize what happened, the sequence of events is that John left to go visit his dad. Anne painted the door. The storm got worse. When she went to go check the barn, she couldn't. Stephen arrived. They ate supper together. They ended up playing cards. They had an affair. And then she felt quite guilty. She decided that, she's chosen John. What we know is that John made it home and somewhere before the storm ended, because he made it home, he discovered that, they had the affair. The storm ends. John's found dead the next morning, and he has that paint on his hand. That's how we know he was inside the house, right? So that's just the kind of like the plot summary. Now, obviously, it goes a little bit deeper than this. Now, what we're going to eventually show you later today is there's a 2.5 minute video that kind of summarizes the whole thing, which is quite nice. But we're gonna kind of keep on going through our little worksheet actually. So let me actually load that up here. So we're actually going to finish answering that worksheet together, and then we're going to find quotes to support it. Because I think we have enough now to pretty much answer everything. But what we really need now is we need to later find quotes. And so, as a lovely refresher, what we're going to do to start is we're going to watch a short video once my stuff downloads. No. This is a 2 minute video. So this is a really this is a really well studied piece of literature, right? Like a lot of people read this. And so a lot of other people have analyzed it. So they've done some work for us. So why don't we go over some of their stuff? Now, specifically, some of the stuff you're going to find here. So the video is going to highlight some answers about like question 5, for example. It's going to highlight some stuff about like question 7. It's going to highlight some deeper themes, which we'll dig back into. But so if you remember that worksheet that you had there, this is going to start answering some of those questions. So let me just load up the worksheet and I'll bring the video over. I'm glad you're here. I have asked for a new laptop. Oh, shit. There we go, finally. So yeah, this is what the thing we had started working on yesterday. Now we probably have most of this filled in, but there's probably still some stuff that we're missing. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be filling this in after watching a video, and then we're going to be continuing our analyzation of the text. Because at that point, we're going to start pulling quotes in. We're going to start making an argument, and we're going to be continuing to do that for the rest of the week here. So let me pull this over here. Nope, not that. This. So this is a 2.5 minute video analysis of the Painted Door. Now there are tons of these located throughout YouTube. So like if you're ever interested, you can find some like university graduate level work on this piece. If you really want to go like really deep into it, we don't need to go that deep, but we still need to go somewhat deep. So this is going to be a nice summary of it. So 2.5 minutes. I'm going to put some speakers in here so you're able to watch it. They don't actually say what's happened, so you kind of need to read it. I'll pause it. There's our plot summary. We just went over that. I'm just gonna pause. And the protagonist. We'll learn about like some of this stuff a little bit later, but so we know she's lonely. We know she feels isolated. She hasn't seen anyone in 7 years, right? Um, she's frustrated and she wants some attention. She wants some attention from her husband. Her husband's not giving it to. So who does she turn in her moment of weakness? Well, we still had to go deeper yesterday with a lot of stuff. So, um, Anne's entire thing here is like, if we remember, so this last sentence, her purpose in the story is to prove that loneliness can cause people to do drastic things. We know that she did not intend on cheating on John that night. She initially did not want Stephen to come. She wanted to try and be a good wife, but she got lonely. She was upset. Um, she wasn't thinking clearly, right? And when afterwards, when it was done, she was thinking a little bit more clearly. She had a lot more guilt. We know that John, he so that's the husband, right? Um, he's really quiet. He's hard work. He doesn't talk to his wife though. He thinks he's providing her the life that she wants, but he doesn't communicate with her. And then we have Stephen, of course, and yeah, I mean that's their analysis. I disagree with the Strawn part for sure there. I mean he's the guy who's working he's working really hard, right? He's trying to keep things together as well as he can. For sure, for sure. So, but this is a really important sentence. Her purpose in the story is to prove that loneliness can cause people to do drastic things. I think we've all been in a situation where we have our own demons inside us to battle, right? And sometimes those things have won. Sometimes that's substance issues. Sometimes that's, maybe you have a problem with like procrastination. Maybe you should do something like something, even if it's something as simple as cleaning the house or it's something that's helping your kid with homework, whatever it is. We've all been in a situation where we knew what the right path was, but we didn't take it. That's just what it means to be human, right? Now, obviously, her path's a little bit more severe. She ended up cheating on her husband here, but it's an example of again, like she was lonely, and in a moment of weakness, she screwed up. She screwed up pretty big, and she regrets it after the fact. Um, but that's something that's really really important about Anne. So first off, like if you look at number 7 here, like who do you believe is most at fault between Stephen and Anne? I'm not gonna like you're welcome to make up your own mind there as to who is most at fault. But one thing we do know here, enable editing. One thing we do know is that oh come on, we know that Anne was in a moment of weakness, right? Because of her loneliness. So we know Anne's in a state of weakness, like mentally. She's in a mental state of weakness, right? It's 7 years. She's frustrated. She feels alone. She's never been alone before, right? She's never been away from John before. Okay, I'm gonna keep on going through. right? Like we know this is narrative writing because it's telling a story that like as things continue to go on. Most of the stuff we're going to read is narrative. There's descriptions, of course. They describe the storm quite well, but it's at the end of the day, it's a narrative piece. And so with this mood and atmosphere, that brings us back to yesterday, right? We looked at all those pictures and like, how the mood, how the background can change how we feel here, right? I mean, it's cold outside right now. There's lots of snow and the ice on the ground right now. None of us are happy about that. We all hate that in some part of us. So so the mood can change how people feel here, right? And in this case, the mood's depressing. It's sad. The weather's really connected with how Anne feels, and her relationship with John as well. Um, we'll come back to that probably in a couple weeks. Back just a little bit. Right here. Um, it talks about, again, there's symbology here, right? Like what's a symbol? What is an actual like symbol here? This is something that I wanted to talk about today. What does it mean when something's a symbol? So just to give you an example here, because I figured we might be a little stumped with this. Um, Come on. I'm just waiting for my computer to load up here. Well, I mean that symbolized something for sure. But so I'm not looking for like a right now. I'm not looking for an example of a symbol in the piece. I just want to know what is a symbol? Like not like what does that actually mean? If I say, and this is a symbol of something, something, something. Yeah, it's a representation, right? Symbols have power. I'm going to show you a case in point. This symbol has a lot of power, right? Yes. Yeah. So like this is the swastika, right? Like this is what the Nazis did. Nazis did a lot of horrible things. You can't put this anywhere anymore. It's basically taboo everywhere. If you go down the street waving one of these flags, someone is going to punch you in the face. Yes. But so again, but what's the big deal? It's a picture, right? What's the big deal? It's a picture. How come people are so against this now? Because of what it stood for. That's exactly right. Like when we see this, we see a reminder. This is a visual representation, a reminder of all the horrors that happened, right? Of like of World War II, of the Holocaust, and all that stuff. Now, you want to know what's really interesting as well? Let me just load it up. The swastika itself, the Nazi symbol, came from a Hindu symbol. So this is the sign of auspiciousness. And so this was actually like, it was a well-regarded symbol until the Nazis took it over, to be completely honest with you. Auspiciousness means like strong, favorable, like quality. It, it's like a strong, like it represents like, to be strong. And so the Nazis took that, turned it into a flag, and now we can't even use this symbol anymore, right? Because that's what it was like inspired from, and then like twisted. So symbols have power, right? And so they represent things. We can look at symbols and we can gain a deeper understanding. We can connect it to other things. I could show you a bunch of different actually, I'm going to show you one more. There was one more I wanted to show you. Bear with me 1 second while my computer loads. Yep. Yeah, holds a lot of power, right? Here we go. And open image and new tab. All right, and here's another symbol here. That's the Batman symbol, right? Shown up in the sky. But like, has anyone seen the newest Batman movie at all? Like the one with the Riddler and stuff? It was actually pretty good. I didn't think the guy from Twilight could pull it off, but he did. So it's actually a pretty good movie. But you know, any movie you've ever seen where this symbol goes up in the sky, you know, and right afterwards they show like a criminal looking up and like, oh, they're scared, right? Symbols have power and it represents things. So when like this symbol is shown up in the sky in like Gotham City, that's what it is, right? You know, criminals become afraid. They know not to go out and do stuff because they might get caught, right? So like symbols have power. And if we go back to the painted door, the storm represents something, right? We already know what the storm symbolizes. The storm symbolizes one, her relationship with John. As she becomes more confused, the storm worsens. When at the very end she makes up her mind that she chooses John, the storm clears up, right? So the storm represents her relationship with John and how she feels. As she gets more confused about her relationship, the storm gets worse. As she comes to a conclusion with it, it gets better. Now, the fire, of course, though, is going to be Stephen. Stephen is Stephen is the roaring fire. Like anytime we'll find quotes of this later, but anytime Stephen's mentioned in like the first 3 pages there, Anne's always doing something with fire. She's building a fire. She's adding wood to a fire. You know, the fire crackles, stuff like that. It's always referenced here. And like there's a spark between them, right? That's what it's referring to. We know that they have a past. They went out dancing a whole bunch. She has feelings for Stephen. She's trying not to act on them. She didn't want to see him today, but we know that there's something there. So it's a fire like between them. It's meant to represent their emotions, the chance that, you know, they could maybe be together. Um, all this different stuff here. So I'm going to keep on going forward here. But so right here, this is the start of question 5 here, at least. We know that Stephen represents the fire. We have an idea as to why. It's just the fact he's a new he's a new spark, or he's an old spark, right? The feelings are coming up again. They're growing, just like a fire. You add wood to a fire, it grows. And then, of course, John represents the cold. You know, remember at the very start, you know, the first few lines, it talked about how she said some words against the window. It was so cold, and like her breath went up, like fogged up against the window and stuff. You know, anytime she's thinking about John, the storm gets referenced right after. These two things symbolize these two people. Okay, I'm gonna keep on powering through. We can go really. A couple of themes here. Um, so like there's betrayal, regret, isolation. We'll learn more about themes a little bit later. But you know, John was betrayed, right? John was betrayed, and Anne feels a lot of. Anne was, first off, she was kind of regretting being with John. It sounded like at the start, right? She was missing, like, you know, she felt like she was missing on some of her youth. She felt isolated and stuff. She felt sad. Um, she eventually regretted cheating, though, right? Like she felt awful about doing it. Now, you might not forgive her for it, but you know she at least feels bad about it. Next scene, like they're naked. What? You betcha. Okay. Okay. Now we're starting to see some insights into the text. So what we're going to do is we're kind of going to power through this bad boy. We're going to go through some of this stuff, and then we're going to start finding quotes. We're going to start finding proof, right? We can make a statement. We can make a statement with stuff like, hey, Stephen is the fire and John is the cold and the storm. Cool, we've made a statement. We need to back it up with evidence later, though, right? So, um, just to kind of start out here, let's start going through some of this stuff here. You guys able to see okay? Okay, so what's the setting of the story? Did anyone catch what that was in the video? Yeah, so it's a secluded farmhouse in the prairies. What else is in the setting? We know that it's isolated. We know that there's a cold winter storm going on. We know that it's just the two of them, right? It's just Anne and John. That's it. That's all who's left. Now, there's one other thing as well. And you had mentioned this, Stephen. What is it? It's about the times. Ye- Yeah, so it's in the old times. Now, what we know, and like, this is not referenced in the text, but this is something you get to know when you know the author. Like he grew up in the Depression. He wrote a lot about it. So the Great Depression, that's when this is based on, actually, is during the Great Depression. So this is in the old times. So basically, this is in the 1920s. There's a wood stove. There's no cars. You use snowshoes to walk. And most people in the community are a farmer, right? She's a farmer's wife. Cool. So we've listed a whole bunch of stuff. Cool. We described the setting, right? We know where it is. We know when it is. We know like what's surrounding it. But how is this setting important? To, mhm. Ooh, so what depicts her minds and thoughts? The storm, right? Yeah, yeah. So the storm depicts uh her mind. Oops. Depicts what's going on in her mind. Um, it depicts what's going on in her mind. It depicts her relationship with John, and her like indecisiveness. So we know the storm has power. It's a symbol of all those things. Her mind, her relationship with John, like her having to make a decision. The storm gets worse as her thoughts get worse. All this stuff. Now, there's another important thing here as well. So remember, one of the themes here is she's indecisive in this betrayal. Another theme though was also it was isolation, right? So how does the setting prove that there's like how does it foreshadow some of this isolation stuff that's happening? So looking at the stuff we did in our setting here, how can that prove that this is isolation? Like part of what's frustrated Anne is that she's been isolated for 7 years. Oh yeah, yeah, that would get to most people. Now she's seen other people in those 7 years, but not very often, right? So how is this set important to the story? Well, we know that so Anne is all alone. Like not only is she physically isolated, so she is physically isolated, she feels emotionally isolated as well, right? So when we know that, this is just a secluded farmhouse in the prairies, there's no one around for 2 miles. That's her closest neighbor, Stephen, who is 2 miles away, right? She's by herself. That's it. She has John, but she doesn't really feel she can talk to him. So cool. We have a setting of the story here. We know why it's important, but now going into here, what's our early indication of the story that suggests Anne's discontent with her marriage? We know she's not happy with her marriage in the start of the story. How do we know that? How does she talk about John? Yeah. Anne calls John dumb. Yeah, she calls him dumb. She calls him stupid, right? She, she she's always comparing him to Stephen, right? It's a good story. Just unfortunate you share the name. So Anne calls John dumb. She's always comparing him to Stephen. Oops, comparing him to Stephen, right? Talking about like, oh, you should be clean shaven because Stephen is too. You know, that's just one example there. We'll find evidence to support this stuff here in a bit. So just make sure you leave some space here. But she calls John dumb. She's always comparing him to Stephen. Not only that, you know, if you remember, like near the end, she was talking about how um she wants more. Like she doesn't just want to be mortgage free and have pretty dresses later. She wants what now? Sorry? Yeah, yeah. Um, Anne wants excitement, and John does not provide that. Yeah. So the hard part here, and this is a hard question, is the bolded part. We want to explain how her dissatisfaction may be explained by the isolation and bleakness of the prairie winter setting. So let's break that down. Basically, we want to try and just like explain like why she's sad about their marriage because she's isolated. We need to draw a reference to the landscape, right? Like go up to the setting here. We have it. We know what the landscape's like. You're going to have to do this in 2 months. You're gonna have to compare this to the landscape. Yes, that will be a question on the final. I guarantee it. So explain how her dissatisfaction may be explained by the isolation and bleakness of the prairie winter storm or prairie winter setting. Well, yeah, 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 yeah. So Anne is isolated. Yeah, so she's isolated physically. She feels isolated. Um, there's a storm going on outside that represents her thoughts about John, right? And sorry, and you said one more thing, Kimberly. So yeah, if we know she's, oh, I'm just gonna bold this just so we know it's the bolded part of it. So yeah, there's a storm going on outside that represents her thoughts about John. She's isolated there, like you know, she's in an isolated area, right? Um, yeah, yeah, she can't escape her thoughts. What happened when she tried to go check on the animals? Did she make it? She didn't. She couldn't. She couldn't. She opened the door. It was too windy. It was too cold. It was too stormy. She couldn't escape her thoughts. She couldn't escape the house. She was stuck there. Yeah, she kind of. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The house is her. The storm outside is like, you know, that's her feelings about there. The fires, Steven. So there's all sorts of symbology here. Um, but like, there's another word here, bleakness. What is? Does anyone know what bleak means? Yeah, dull, plain, sad, bored. It's just, you know, it's the opposite of excitement, right? Um, isn't that kind of her life? So like right now, you know, she lives, it's a bleak prairie winter setting right now. Look outside. Like if we look outside right now, it sucks, right? No one's excited to go outside at 3 o'clock today. Or you probably weren't excited to actually go outside at like 7 or 8 today whenever you woke up because right, it's cold, it's dark, it's windy. Oh, there you go. So, oh yeah, their wingspans are ridiculous. So, um, we know she's unhappy. She's unhappy. The house like represents her, right? Like she can't escape this house, so she tries to keep herself busy. So when John leaves, how does her loneliness like what happens with her loneliness? Yeah. So we already know Anne was feeling lonely even when John was there, right? She was. And why was that? Yeah, she was bored. She didn't see other people. She's on an isolated farm. She doesn't see a lot of people. John doesn't like her going to the neighbors or to town. It's the only time we see him get angry is when she mentions that she wants to go see neighbors or go into town, right? He actually gets upset about that. So Anne was feeling lonely even when John was there. When John leaves, this gets amplified. Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, so when John leaves, this gets amplified. It gets worse. Um, she felt alone before. Now she is alone. She's actually by herself. And so what does she do? Like what does she face? Why did she not want to be alone? Why was she keeping herself busy? Yeah, yeah. So when she's alone, she starts to ooh, that's not where I wanted to go. Yeah, she starts to brood. She starts to think about something a little bit too much. She doesn't want to think about this, right? She starts to brood, so she keeps herself busy. So when John leaves, Anne gets more lonely. She gets more lonely. Oops. So now I want to go into some of their similarities and differences here. So on the left we have similarities. So how are Stephen and John similar? Does anyone have anything that they listed so far? Sorry. Yep. So they both own a farm. So that's a key one for sure, right? Both care for Anne. Not only do they care for her, they both have feelings for her, don't they? It's not it's not like, Stephen doesn't view her as just a friend. Stephen likes her too, right? Yeah. Well, okay, so so John might love him, like sorry, John might love her, Stephen might lust her. Now, so just I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. What I am going to bring up though is Stephen walked 2 miles through a storm to see her. Yeah, like they both work hard. Um, they both do work hard for her for sure. Yeah, both knew the risks to travel, right? Like this was mentioned a whole lot. Like they knew this was going to suck. It was going to be dangerous to go through this, right? Were they friends? Stephen and John? Oops. Stephen and John were friends. John was the one who had the idea. Yeah, John was the one who had the idea to go to Stephen's house. Now they both represent an element as well. Both represent an element in the story. The element they represent is different, but they both represent something in the story. The fire and ice thing for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Any Game of Thrones fans. And then finally, of course, one thing we do know is that, yeah, okay, here we go. Both walked through the storm. Only 2 miles in a blizzard, though. Remember, she couldn't make it out of the house. So less than John, of course, but still sucked. So let's go into some of the differences here. And there's a lot. There's a lot of these. So how are these two people different? Yeah, they both have qualities the other one doesn't. So what are those qualities? How come? So let's talk about John. What's John's qualities? Yeah, he's calm. What else? Yeah, he's stern. He's strong. He's hardworking, right? He goes all day and all night. Sorry. Yeah, he's simple. Does he talk much? I didn't hear the very first part there. He's her sanity. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. And when Steven enters, it ends up like so like he's stable. He's stable, right? He annoys her. He keeps her frustrated and isolated, but he at least keeps her stable, or the work does anyways. Yeah, he's stable and secure, right? Like he just wants to work hard to save money so he can give her a simple life. But not a simple life, a good life. He really cares about Anne. He thinks the world of Anne, right? We have proof of this later. So let's talk about well, spontaneous is just like, hey, let's all go bowling right now. Oh yeah, just cause, yeah, yeah. But in talking about spontaneity, Steven seems like spontaneous, right? Like he kind of does. But so like what's some of his qualities, right? Oh, sorry, we missed one up here. He's boring. He is boring, and he he doesn't talk much, right? He doesn't communicate. Okay, so we have a bunch of John's qualities. So going into Steven's qualities, what are some of his? Now, if we're looking at the stuff up top, like how would he be different based on off those things? He's clean shaven. He's smart. He likes to talk, right? Yeah, yeah. So he notices things that John doesn't, and he appreciates them, right? Like whether that's, she did her hair up, like what she was wearing, old stories. Like he paid a lot of attention to detail there. Like, hey, do you remember last year? This is the perfume you were wearing, and this is the dress you had, and these are the earrings you had, all this stuff. So he notices things that John doesn't. Um, so he's clean shaven, he's smart, he likes to talk, he notices things that John doesn't. He's fun. He's fun. He's fun to be around, right? They go dancing and all this other stuff. So we've got a good amount of qualities there. Is there anything that we're missing that you think? So what are some other differences between them? So we have their qualities now. What else? Yeah, John doesn't dance. Stephen danced all night, 6 different times, right? Like they went these dances 6 times. And not only that, like this represents fun. That's what that represents. Hmm. Uh, I'm just gonna go like John. Um, John doesn't talk and notice things, but Stephen does. Oops, tings. Anything else that we could be missing here? What about these elements, right? We know that John represents cold and the storm, and then Stephen represents um, you know, warm and the fire. So that's a different. They both represent something. That's something they have the same, but they're both different in that way. I think we've got quite a few differences there, unless there's anything else that we can think of. Sorry. Oh, I never caught that. I don't know if it represents anything though. Throw it in there. We have space. Yeah, I'm not even gonna. I'm just not gonna put it just because I don't think it represents much in the story. um, okay. I wanna come back to this one, but one thing we know is we just know that um Stephen represents fire, and then John represents the cold and storm. Okay. Well, so what we know that Steven's a womanizer, right? Like this is heavily hinted at because the neighbors all talk about him. And remember, like all the other farmers' wives, they get left alone. I wonder why they're all talking about Steven. What kind of mischief does he get up to, right? So we'll come back to this. We're gonna come back to this. We need more. We need to look at the text more to come back to this. But Stephen represents fire. John represents cold and the storm. So first off, what does Anne really want at the end? She what? She wants her husband. She chose John, right? So that's what she wants. When does she realize she wants John? Yeah. She realized she wanted this after having an affair with Stephen. The 1920s, like I think you're kind of like I think you're like as a woman, you're kind of shunned if you do almost. Like, but no one else knows that. She knows for sure. She's gonna have to live with that forever. So she realized after having an affair, that she wants John. So after she has her affair with Steven, she wants John. Um, now, how did we know this? What scene did the movie do? So she sleeps with Steven. She's up all night. Um, mhm, yeah. So, um, we know that she chooses John. Again, I'm typing in complete sentence here. We know she chooses John after she looks at her wedding photo, looks at his gloves, and says it didn't mean anything. Is is there anything I'm missing? Oh, I see. You know what? We'll make sure this is available to you guys at the end too. So worst comes to worst, we just print out a new copy. But um, okay. So Who's most at fault? Anne and Steven slept together. They're both at fault. Who do we think is most at fault? So we think Anne is because she's the married one. Steven, what's your thoughts? Hmm? Yeah. Sorry. Classroom, Steven, what's your thoughts? Yeah. Do you think Steven's most at fault? Oh yeah, they're both tremendously at fault for this. Absolutely. So let's just summarize some of the stuff here. So reasons we're gonna do reasons why both these are false. So reasons why Anne is at fault. It's hard to say. There's no right answer. It all comes down to how you feel. For sure. So let's just list out the reasons here. So first off, Control B, there we go. So here's the reasons why Anne was at fault. She was in a moment of weakness because of her loneliness. She originally did not want Stephen there, but she was in a moment of weakness. That's number one. Um, she is the one who is married. Yeah, yeah. So she's the one who's married. You know, right? You need to be loyal. hmm Um, she acted on her urges, right? She was the one who acted on them. So she was in a moment of weakness. She was lonely. She's the one who's married, and she ended up acting on it. Um, so that's a couple. She well, we'll go into that. So, like we'll go into that. hmm Yeah. This is so we're just right now we're just listing reasons why Anne's at fault, and then we're gonna do reasons why Steven's at fault. There's no wrong answer as to who you believe is more at fault. Both of them screwed up. She was married. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Well, that's just it. She's the one who's married. She's the one who's loyal. She's the one who acted on her urges. Um, so we've got some reasons there. So let's do some reasons why Steven's at fault here. Yeah, yeah. He knows that she's married. That's one thing there. Um, we know he's a womanizer for one thing, for sure. Yeah. So we know he's a womanizer. Do we think he maybe recognized that? So Anne kept on saying, "Oh, he'll be here. He's always been here. He's always been here." What was Steven saying? So like when the storm was happening, like he hadn't come by supper time yet. Anne was saying that oh, John is always here. He always makes it through every storm. Always, he wouldn't leave me alone. He said he'd be here. What was Steven trying to convince her of? Yeah, Steven was trying to convince her that John wouldn't show up, which is not an unreasonable thing. This is the worst winter they've seen in years, the worst storm they've seen in years. But she still knew, right? She's like somewhere deep in down, she still knew. Hmm. So, Steven's at fault because, he knows she's married. Steven was trying to convince her that John wouldn't show up. Um, John asked him to come to watch over her, right? Hey, my wife's lonely, my wife's bored. Can you please go keep her company while I'm away for the day? Remember, that's the entire reason Steven came, because John asked him. So I want to go back to Anne here as well. Right when Steven came by, she went up into her room and did what? Yeah, yeah. She prettied up. She did her hair. I don't recall if she changed her dress or not, but um, yeah, she made herself look better. Absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. So John asked him. So I'm going back to Stephen. So we know that John asked him to watch over her, and we know that Anne was in a moment of weakness because of her loneliness. Do we think Stephen maybe recognized this? He knows women. This is not the only farmer's wife that we know he's visited. So, um, so we think maybe Stephen's a little, uh, yeah, manipulative. There's the word. Maybe maybe he's a little manipulative, right? Like, boom, right there. There's one manipulation there. That's one thing there. So Stephen's a little manipulative. So we have a couple reasons here. There's more. We'll add to it later. But so now that we've found it out, and again, there's no wrong answer here. I want to rehear your thoughts. Who's at fault? Okay? You still think Anne? They're both at fault, but who's more at fault? Well, they're both pretty. They're both made some pretty big mistakes here. Some favor, he died. Some friend for sure. Yeah. So like, right? Like they're both at fault here. You can argue either way. You could say 50-50. You could say this person's more at fault. You could say this person's more at fault. There's no wrong answer here. They're both at fault. So what happens at the very end? What happened? Yeah, John died. John died, and when they found his body, his hand had white paint on it. It should be. Do I have the copy with me? I think in the video they used yellow paint just because like you could argue whatever color of paint you want. Like that's fine. There's no way they're gonna dock you marks for that. Let me just take a look here. Very, very end. Like I think the reason they used yellow paint was because it like, just so the camera could see it better. I'm just going through. I think it was on page. Was it 4? Yeah, where the heck is this? You know what? Screw it. The color doesn't matter. They found his hand and it had paint on it. The color itself doesn't matter. We just know that his hand had paint on it. This means he came inside and he saw them. Now, I don't think any of us caught this when we watched it, but she had a dream that he was looking over them. This is not a dream. She saw him looking down at their two naked bodies. He was found outside, but he had to have come in the house, right? So he came to the house, he went up to the bedroom, he saw that they were together, and then he left. Yeah. Oh yeah. Um, well, we'll see this in here. So maybe that's a little bit of a spoiler here. But so yeah, John died. They found his body. His hand had paint on it. This means he came inside and he saw them. So he came inside the house and he saw them having an affair. Okay. So that's a good start so far. Oh yes. So what we've done is we like based most of what we've done here is based off the film at this point, right? It's mostly based off that film. We still have quite a few pages to go through, but we have a good idea now as to a lot of the themes going on, a lot of the things that's happening here. What we're primarily going to be focused on now is details we missed and finding quotes to prove it. Remember, we're making statements, right? So now we can make statements. If you were asked the question, like, who do you think was most at fault? You could list some reasons. You want to try and now find quotes to back that up, right? You have a statement. This is why, this is why, this is why. And in English, we need to refer to the text. So that's something we're going to do next. But for now, we're actually going to take our break. All right, so keeping on here. So like I said, we have a pretty good idea what's going on here. What we want now is we want quotes because it's gonna be really helpful for us in the coming weeks, in 2 months from now when you write the departmental, because we want to do this now while it's fresh. Because if we come back 2 months from now, we might not understand everything again. Um, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep on kind of reading through. Oh, I do have highlighters as well, actually. Let me hand those out. The goal is we're probably going to be highlighting a little bit less now. Looking for the most important of quotes, the biggest ones that hit home the hardest. Sorry. Right now. We were just going to do a group reading there. Oh, you did not get the email. So just going to continue on going through some stuff here. Again, you're welcome to do it on your own, but we're just kind of going through it as a group as well. I'll upload this for you guys to be able to see after as well. Oh, this computer. Hey, there we go. So where we left off was just them, was her comparing, uh, I guess like John. She was just talking about like John here and his personality, that he worked so hard and sacrificed everything for her. So kind of carrying on here. I'm just going to reread the last paragraph and keep going. Uh, I'm at the bottom of page 3. We've done this already, but just as a refresher, I'm just going to reread it. I'm not going to talk anything about it and then keep going. So for spring was drudgery again. John never hired a man to help him. He wanted a mortgage-free farm, that a new house and pretty clothes for her. Sometimes because with the best of crops, it was going to take so long to pay off anyways. She wondered whether they mightn't be better off to let the mortgage wait a little, before they were worn out, before their best years were gone. It was something of life she wanted, not just a house and furniture, something of John. Not pretty clothes when she would be too old to wear them, but John couldn't understand. To him, it seemed only right that she should have the clothes, only right that he, fit for nothing else, should slave away 15 hours a day to give them to her. There was in his devotion a baffling, insurmountable humility. that made him feel the need of sacrifice. And when his muscles ached, when his feet dragged stolidly with weariness, then it seemed in some measure at least he was making amends for this big hulking body and simple mind. That by his sacrifice he succeeded only in the extinction of his personality never occurred to him. Year after year, their lives went on in the same little groove. He drove his horses in the field. She milked the cows and hoed potatoes. By dint of his drudgery, he saved a few months' wages, added a few dollars more each fall to his payments on the mortgage. But the only real difference that it made was to deprive her of his companionship, to make him a little duller, older, uglier than he might otherwise have been. He never saw their lives objectively. To him, it was not what he actually accomplished by the means of the sacrifice that mattered, but the sacrifice itself, the gesture, something done for her sake. And she, understanding, kept her silence. In such a gesture, however futile, there was a graciousness not to be shattered lightly. John, she would sometimes begin, you're doing too much. Get a man to help you, just for a month. But smiling down at her, he would answer simply, I don't mind. Look at the hands on me. They're made for work. While in his voice there would be a stalwart ring to tell her that by her thoughtfulness she had made him only the more resolved to serve her, to prove his devotion and fidelity. So because she brings this up, he wants to work even harder for her. They were useless such thoughts. She knew it was his very devotion that made him useless, that forbade her to rebel. Yet over and over, sometimes hunched still before their bleakness, sometimes her brush making swift, sharp strokes to pace the chafe and rancor that they brought, she persisted in them. This now, the winter, was their slack season. She could sometimes sleep till 8, and John till 7. They had more time. They could linger over their meals a little, read, play cards, go visiting the neighbors. It was time to relax, to indulge and enjoy themselves. But instead, fretful and impatient, they kept on waiting for the spring. They were compelled now, not by labor, but by the spirit of labor, a spirit that pervaded their lives and brought with idleness a sense of guilt. Sometimes they did sleep late, sometimes they did play cards, but always uneasily, always reproached by the thought of more important things that might be done. So again, they never enjoyed their time together, always reproached by the thought of more important things to do. They're not enjoying their time together because they know that there's just work that needs to be done. You can't enjoy the moment. When John got up at 5 to attend to the fire, he wanted to stay up and go out to the stable. But he sat down to a meal. When he sat down to a meal, he hurried his food and pushed his chair away again, from habit, from sheer work instinct, even though it was only to put more wood in the stove or to go down cellar to cut up beets and turnips for the cows. And anyways, she sometimes asked herself, why sit trying to talk to a man who never talked? So now that's a reason why we know that's one reason why we know she's not talking to him, because why would I try? He's just not going to talk to me. And then earlier as well, um, she knew that she had to keep her silence because he's working so hard and she didn't want to shatter that. Why talk when there was nothing to talk about but crops and cattle, the weather and the neighbors? The neighbors too. Why go visiting them when still it was the same? Crops and cattle, the weather and other neighbors. Okay, so now even though she goes to talk to people, she's not fulfilled. It doesn't feel right. She's not having fun, even when she does. Why go? Why go to he dances in the schoolhouse to sit among the older women? One of them now, married 7 years, or to waltz with the work bent, tired old fanners to a squeaky fiddle tune. Once she had danced with Stephen 6 or 7 times in the evening, and they had talked about it as many months. It was easier to stay at home. John never danced himself. He was always uncomfortable in his good suit and shoes. He didn't like shaving in the cold weather oftener than once or twice a week. It was easier to stay at home, to stand at the window, staring out across the bitter fields, to count the days and look forward to another spring. Why is she looking forward to another spring? So yeah. You can't be sad if there's work to do. That's exactly it. So we know this is important, right? She can't handle to be alone. She can't handle to brood. She wants to keep busy. So they count the days to look forward to another spring. But now, alone in the winter silence, she saw the spring for what it really was. This spring, next spring, and all the springs and summers to come. While they grew old, while their bodies warped, while their minds kept shriveling dry and empty, like their lives. I mustn't, she said aloud again. I married him, and he's a good man. I mustn't keep on this way. It will be noon before long, and the time to think about, and then time to think about supper. Maybe he'll come early, and as soon as John is finished at the stable, we can all play cards. So pretty important quote here. Um, but so she saw the spring for what it really was, and this spring, and next spring, and all the future springs. What has she seen it for? What does it mean? Like, what does that actually mean? Yeah, it's just going to be a born life. That's exactly it. Um, and so again, what's she trying to convince herself here? Don't think like that, right? Like he's a good guy. He works hard for me. I should be more appreciative of the things he does. She's still by herself here at this time. Um, so again, when she's by herself, she looks forward to the future, and she just sees that it's going to be boring and sad. But this is super important here. Empty like their lives. So while they grew old, while their bodies warped, while their minds kept shriveling dry, and empty like their lives. That's hard to say, right? My life is empty. That's hard. I mustn't, she said again, I married him and he's a good man. I mustn't keep on this way. Okay. So it was getting cold again, and she left her painting to put in more wood. But this time the warmth spread slowly. She pushed a she pushed a mat up to the outside door and went back to the window to pat down the woolen shin that was padded all along the sill. Then she paced a few times round the room, then poked the fire and rattled the stove lids, then paced again. The fire crackled, the clock ticked. Remember, these things mean something. The silence now seemed more intense than ever, seemed to have reached a pitch where it faintly moaned. She began to pace on tiptoe, listening, her shoulders drawn together, not realizing for a while that it was the wind she heard, thin strained and whimpering through the eaves. Then she wheeled to the window and with quick, short breaths thawed the frost to see again. The glitter was gone. Across the drifts swept across the drift swept swift and snake-like little tons of snow. So um, glitter, right? That's just a light sprinkling of snow, right? So this is around noon. So it's just snowing a little bit. And then remember, we know that the storm's about her feelings, right? So as she's pacing more and more and more, she's agitated, right? She's trying to keep busy. So as she begins to pace on tiptoe, listening, her shoulders drawn together. Um, so as she's getting more and more anxious, the snow's getting worse. That's what that means. She could not follow them where they sprang from or where they disappeared. There's more wind, there's more snow. It was as if all across the yard, the snow was shivering awake, roused by the warnings of the wind to hold itself in readiness for the impending storm. The sky had become a somber, whitish gray. It too, as if in readiness, had shifted and laid close to earth. The sky became a somber, whitish gray. Again, we know the landscape has ties to how she's feeling. She feels like their lives are empty. So now she's forcing herself to think about her future. She doesn't like what she's seeing in the future. And now, again, it's become a really somber attitude out there. The sky's ugly now. Before her, she watched a mane of powdery snow rear up, breasted high against the darker background of the stable, tossed for a moment angrily, and then subsided again, as if whipped down to obedience and restraint. But another followed, more reckless and impatient than the first. Another reeled and dashed itself against the window where she watched. Then ominously, for a while, there were only the angry little snakes of snow. The wind rose, creaking the troughs that were wired beneath the eaves. In the distance, sky and prairie now merged into one another linelessly. All around her it was gathering. Already in its pressin and whimpering, there was a strummed aboding of eventual fury. This is talking about the weather, right? All around her it was gathering. Against this press and whimpering, there was a strummed aboding of eventual fury. Everything's coming together, right? It's just getting more and more like stronger and ferocious. It's everywhere around her. It's the snow, it's the wind, but it's also her feelings, right? It's her loneliness. It's her despair looking into the future. My life is empty, right? Despair is like you have no hope. Yeah, it's a very dark word. So against she saw a mane of snow spring up, so dense and high this time that all the sheds and stables were obscured. Then others followed, whirling fiercely out of hand, and when at last they cleared, the stables seemed in dimmer outline than before. It was the snow beginning, long lancet shafts of it, straight from the north, borne almost level by the straining wind. He'll be there soon, she whispered, coming home it will be in his back. He'll leave again right away. He saw the double wheel. He knows what kind of storm there'll be. Going back to the symbol, right? The double wheel moon. So she convinced himself he'll be back. He'll be fine. She went back to her painting. For a while it was easier. All her thoughts, half anxious ones, of John in the blizzard, struggling his way across the hills, but putantly again she soon began. I knew we were going to have a storm. I told him so, but it doesn't matter what I say. Big stubborn fool. He goes his way anyway. It doesn't matter what becomes of me. In a storm like this, he'll never get home. He won't even try. And while he sits keeping his father company, I can look after his stable for him, go plunging through the snowdrifts up to my knees, nearly frozen. Not that she meant or believed her words. It was just an effort to convince herself that she did have a grievance, to justify her rebellious thoughts, to prove John responsible for her unhappiness. Again, she's unhappy and she thinks everything's John's fault, right? Is everything's John's fault? No, not really. She just seems unhappy with her place in life. She's depressed. She's clearly depressed. So she was still young, eager for excitement and distractions. Oh, there's a pretty important quote. We know that has meaning. That's going to prove something. And John's steadfastness rebuked her vanity, made her complaints seem weak and trivial. He's so strong. Why am I complaining? Fretfully, she went on. If he'd listened to me sometimes and not be so stubborn, we wouldn't be living still in a house like this. 7 years in 2 rooms. 7 years and never a new stick of furniture. There, as if another coat of paint could make it different anyways. So again, for 7 years, she's been feeling this way. She's been depressed. She's been lonely. She doesn't see the point anymore of even going to these dances and neighbors because it's all the same stuff. And for 7 years, she's been at her home in 2 rooms. Nothing's changed. Right? Can you maybe understand why she's depressed? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a solitary confinement, right? Like if you throw like a person in solitary confinement, they go mad after a while. It's actually like goes against human rights in some ways. Okay. So she cleaned her brush, filled up the stove again, and went back to the window. There was a void white moment that she thought must be frost formed on the window pane. Like a fitful shadow through the whirling snow, she recognized the stable roof. It was incredible. The sudden maniac raging of the storm struck from her face all its pettishness. Her eyes glazed with fear a little, her lips blanched. If he starts for home now, she whispered silently, but he won't. He knows I'm safe. He knows Stephen coming across the hills. He would never dare. She's never seen a storm this bad before. She knows it's going to be dangerous. She turned to the stove, holding out her hands to warmth. Around her now, there seemed to be a constant sway and tremor, as if the air were vibrating with the violet shudderings of the walls. She stood quite still, listening. Sometimes the wind struck with sharp, savage blows. Sometimes it bore down in a sustained, minute-long blast, silent with effort and intensity. Then, with a foiled shriek of a threat, wheeled away to gather and assault again. Always the eaves trough, creaked and sawed. She started towards the window again, then detecting the morbid trend of her thoughts, prepared fresh coffee and forced herself to drink a few mouthfuls. He would never dare, she whispered again. He wouldn't leave the old man anyways in such a storm. Safe in there. Sorry, safe in here. There's nothing for me to keep worrying about. It's already one after. I'll do my bacon now, and then it will be time to get supper ready for Stephen. The morbid trend of her thoughts. What does that mean? What does morbid mean? Dark, right? It's very dark. It's like what dark thought is she having? Yeah, she's genuinely worried that he's going to try. He does. Absolutely he does. So she's really anxious now about his safety. So she cares for John, even though she's complaining about him a lot. All right. So soon, however, she began to doubt whether Stephen would come. Again, it's an awful storm out. In such a storm, even a mile was enough to make a man hesitate. Especially Stephen, for all his attractive qualities, was hardly the one to face a blizzard for the sake of someone else's chores. He's selfish, right? Now we have a difference here, right? So that there's a difference right there. John just went 12 miles for someone else. Stephen, she's saying, oh, he's really attractive, but he wouldn't dare go through here. He says he's not that far. He won't come to help me. He had a stable of his own to look after anyways. It would only be natural for him to think that when the storm rose, John had turned again for home. Another man would have put his wife first. She's comparing. We have some comparisons here happening, right? So she began to doubt even like Stephen would come. So the second she starts thinking that, what do we think is going to happen with her thoughts? Well, we know that Stephen is coming, but right now she doesn't know this. She thinks Stephen's not going to come because the storm's too bad. She does not handle well with being alone. So we can probably presume that this is going to make her downward spiral, right? That she's going to become even like her thoughts are going to get even worse now. So another man would have put his wife first. Again, we could possibly use that quote later. Okay, so um, but she felt little dread or uneasiness at the prospect of spending the night alone. It was the first time she had ever been like this on her own resources, and her reaction, now that she could face and appraise her situation calmly, was gradually to feel a kind of adventure and responsibility. It stimulated her. She's excited. Before nightfall, she must go to the stable and feed everything. Wrap up in some of John's clothes, take a ball of string in her hand, one end tied to the door, so that no matter how blinding the storm, she could at least find her way back to the house. She had heard of people having to do that. It appealed to her now because suddenly it made life dramatic. She had not felt the storm yet, only watched it for a minute through the window. So again, she's excited about the storm now. Um, it took nearly an hour to find enough string to choose the right socks and sweaters. Long before it was time to start out, she tried on John's clothes, changing and rechanging, striding across the room to make sure there would be play enough for pitching hay and struggling over snowdrifts. Then she took them off again, and for a while busied herself with baking the little cakes with raisins that he liked, that John liked. um, So night came early. Just for a moment on the doorstep, she shrank back, uncertain. The slow dimming of the light clutched her with an illogical sense of abandonment. Again, this is something with the landscape, right? It's now getting dark outside. That's a really strong sentence. As it's getting darker, she feels abandoned. Her husband's not there. She doesn't think Stephen's coming. I have nobody but myself. It was like the covert withdrawal of an ally, leaving the alien Miles unleashed and unrestrained. Watching the hurricane of withering snow rage past the little house, she forced herself. They'll never stand the night unless I get them fed. It's nearly dark already, and I've work to last an hour. Yeah. Timidly unwinding a little of the string, she crept out from the shelter of the doorway. A gust of wind spun her forward a few yards, then plunged her headlong against the drift that in the dense white whirl lay invisible across her path. For nearly a minute she huddled still, breathless and dazed. The snow was in her mouth and nostrils, inside her scarf and sleeves. As she tried to straighten, a smoldering scud flung itself against her face, cutting off her breath a second time. The wind struck from all sides, blustering and furious. It was as if the storm had discovered her, as if all its forces were concentrated upon her extinction. Seized with panic, suddenly she thrashed out a moment with her arms, then stumbled back and sprawled her length across the drift. She fell. So it was as if the storm discovered her, as if all the forces were concentrated upon her extinction. Again, she just got a sense of abandonment. The storm is related to her feelings, right? She's feeling quite bad. Oh, the storm just got worse. The storm wants to get rid of her. By the time she regained her feet quickly, roused by the whip and batter of the storm to relative anger, for a moment her impulse was to face the wind and strike back blow for blow. Then as suddenly as it had come, her frantic strength gave way to limpness and exhaustion. Suddenly, a comprehension so clear and terrifying that it struck all thought of the stable from her mind, she realized in such a storm her puny insignificance, and the realization gave her new strength, stilled this time to a desperate persistence. She's fighting with herself, yeah. Uh, like the word or oh, and yeah, retaliative, yeah, yeah, that's just it, yeah. It's like retaliating against her. They keep coming at her, right? Yeah, and she's trying. Like these keep coming at her, right? Um, and again, she wants to fight. For a moment, her impulse was to face the wind and strike back blow for blow. And then her frantic straight gave way to limpness and exhaustion, right? She tried to fight and she just can't. Like, the storm's too strong. Her negative thoughts are too strong. Um, just for a moment, the wind held her, numbing and swaying in its vise, then slowly buckled far forward. She groped her way again towards the house. She gave up. Inside, leaning against the door, she stood tense and still a while. It was almost dark now. The top of the stove glowed a deep, dull red. Heedless of the storm, self-absorbed and self-satisfied, the clock ticked on the glib little idiot. He shouldn't have gone, she whispered silently. He saw the double wheel. He knew he shouldn't have left me here alone. She feels abandoned. Now remember, we know that Stephen represents the fire. What happened with the fire here in this paragraph? I'm on page. Oh yeah, page 7. This one here. So I'm on this one here, and I'm just highlighting. Yeah, so it's just the third sentence of that first paragraph there. So the top of the globe glowed a deep, dull red. Right, the fire's dying. The fire's almost dead. She doesn't think Steven's coming either. She's lost a lot of hope. I just highlighted to show you where it was, but you can like that. That's a reference to fire. We know fire is important, so you could highlight the whole thing. Like there's so much stuff here. Um, For so fierce now, so insane and dominant did the blizzard seem that she could not credit the safety of the house. Um, Again, the house is her, right? Like she's the house, that she's this isolated thing, like out there in the middle of nowhere. She can't credit the safety of the house. The house might not be safe anymore. She's not safe from her thoughts anymore. They've beaten her. The warmth and lull around her was not real yet, not to be relied upon. She was still at the mercy of the storm. Only her body, pressing hard like this against the door, was staving it off. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare ease the ache and strain. He shouldn't have gone, she repeated, thinking of the stable again, reproached by her helplessness. They'll freeze in the stalls and I can't reach them. He'll say it's all my fault. He won't believe I tried. Then Stephen came. Quickly, startled to quietness and control, she let him in and lit the lamp. Stephen comes in, fire gets born. Right? Stephen's the fire. Um, he stared at her for a moment. You can take the. Oh, I thought you were going for like a Kleenex or something. He stared at her for a moment, and then flinging his cap, crossed to where she stood and seized her arms. You're so white. What's wrong? Look at me. It was like him in such little situations to be masterful. You should have known better than to go out on a day like this. For a while, I thought I wasn't going to make it here myself. So, what's the first thing Stephen does when he sees her? Something John never does. Sorry? He's worried about her. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? That's the first thing he does is, how are you? Like he just went through hell to get there. I was afraid you wouldn't come. John left early and there was the stable. But the storm had unnerved her, and suddenly at the assurance of his touch and voiced the fear that had sorry, and suddenly at the assurance of his touch and voiced the fear that had been gripping her gave way to an hysteria of relief. She's so relieved, right? So relieved. Scarcely aware of herself, she seized his arm and sobbed against it. She's relying on him for support. He remained still a moment, unyielding, then slipped his other arm around her shoulders. It was comforting, and she relaxed against it. Again, she's insecure right now. He's providing comfort. Hushed by a sudden sense of lull and safety. Her shoulders trembled with the easing of the strain, then fell limp and still. You're shivering. He drew her gently towards the stove. There's nothing to be afraid now, though. I'm going to do the chores for you. Again, he's bringing her closer to the fire, closer to the warmth. She's very comforted around him, right? Like so he's definitely the fire here. It was a quiet, sympathetic voice, yet with an undertone of insolence, a kind of mockery even, that made her draw away quickly and busy herself putting in a fire. With his lips drawn in a little smile, he watched her till she looked at him again. The smile was too insolent, but at the same time companionable. Stephen's smile, and therefore difficult to reprove. It lit up his lean, still boyish face with a peculiar kind of arrogance, features and smiles that were different from John's, from other men, willful and derisive, yet naively so, as if it were less the difference itself he was conscious of than the long accustomed privilege that thereby fell his due. Again, comparing him and John, he was erect, tall, square-shouldered. His hair was dark and trim, his young lips curved, soft and full. While John, she made it the comparison swiftly, was the thick-set, heavy-jowled, and stooped. He always stood before her helpless, a kind of humility and wonderment in his attitude. And Stephen now smiled on her appraisingly with the worldly wise assurance for one of for whom a woman holds neither mystery nor illusion. So again, John like worships her like a god, right? She doesn't want that. She wants like someone like Stephen's making fun of her, and she likes this. It was good of you to come, Stephen. She responded, the words running into a sudden empty laugh. Such a storm to face, I suppose I should feel flattered. For his presumption, his misunderstanding of what had only been a momentary weakness, instead of angering quickened her, roused from latency, and longed to use all the instincts and resource of her femininity. She felt eager, challenged. Something was at hand that hitherto had always eluded her, even in her early days of John, something vital, beckoning, uh, and meaningful. She didn't understand, but she knew. So those last few sentences there, it's talking about her femininity, right? She's eager, she's challenged. There's something that something's eluded her. Something she's not hasn't had this before. What's she feeling? She's horny. Well, that's one way of putting it, right? That's just it. Like she feels wanted, and she feels attracted to someone else. She's not attracted to John. She's attracted to someone else here. Um, Oops, let me just erase that. Didn't mean to do that. So roused from latency and long disuse, all the instincts, like all the instincts. Her instinct is I'm a married woman, and resources of her femininity. She felt eager and challenged. She's attracted to him. Something was at hand that always eluded her, even in the early days with John. Something vital, beckoning, and meaningful. She didn't understand, but she knew. She didn't understand her feelings, but she knew she was attracted to Stephen. The texture of the moment was satisfyingly dreamlike, and incredibly perceived as such, yet equestrian. She was John's wife, she knew, but she also knew that Stephen standing here was different from John. There was no thought or motive, no understanding of herself as the knowledge persisted. Wary and poised round a sudden little core of blind excitement, she evaded him. She evaded him. But it's nearly dark. Hadn't you better hurry if you're going to do the chores? Don't trouble, I can get them off myself. Don't trouble, I can get them off myself. Like she's trying to fight back, right? Like, no, 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 I can do this. I don't want you here. So she was also John's oops, but she knew that Stephen was standing here different than John. Okay, where are we on? Page 8? Page 8. An hour later, when he returned from the stable, she was in another dress, hair rearranged, a little flush of color in her face. She's dressed up. She's attracted to Stephen and she wants him to be attracted to her. So she's completely dolled up. Pouring warm water for him from the kettle into the basin, she said evenly, by the time you're washed, supper will be ready. John said we weren't to wait for him. He looked at her for a moment. But in a storm like this, you're not expecting John? Of course. As she spoke, she could feel the color deepening in her face. She's growing red faced. She's blushing. We're going to play cards. He was the one that suggested it. He went on washing, and then as they took their places at the table, resumed. So John's coming. When are you expecting him? He said it might be 7 or 8, or a little later. Conversation with Steve at other times had always been brisk and natural, but now suddenly she found it strained. He may have work to do for his father. That's what he said when he left. Why do you ask, Stephen? I was just wondering. It's a rough night. He's trying to gauge, right? Like, can he make his move? He always comes. There couldn't be a storm bad enough. It's easier to do the chores in daylight, and I knew he'd be tired. That's why I started out for the stable. She glanced up again, and he was smiling at her, the same insolence, the same little twist of mockery and appraisal. It made her flinch suddenly and ask herself why she was pretending to expect John, why there should be instinct of defense to force her. This time, instead of poise and excitement, it brought her a reminder that she had changed her dress and rearranged her hair. It crushed in sudden silence, through which she heard the whistling wind again and the creaking saw of the eaves. So again, so what she's realized is, she gets reminded of John. The storm kind of picks up again. She's realized that, oh, I just completely dolled myself up for another man. Neither spoke now. There was something strange, almost terrifying, about this Stephen and his quiet, unrelenting smile. But strangest of all was the familiarity. The Stephen she had never seen or encountered, and yet had always known, always expected, always waited for. It was less Stephen himself that she felt than his inevitability. Just as just as she had felt the snow, the silence, and the storm, she kept her eyes lowered on the window past his shoulder, on the stove. But his smile now seemed to exist apart from him, to merge and hover with the silence. She clinked a cup, listened to the whistle of the storm. Always it was there. He began to speak, but her mind missed the meaning of the words. Swiftly she was making comparisons again. His face was so different to John's, so handsome and young and clean shaven. Swiftly, helplessly, feeling the imperceptible and relentless ascendancy that thereby he was gaining over her, sensing sudden menace in this new, more vital life, even as she draws towards it. So Steven's winning, right? Like she's growing more and more attracted to him. Her feelings for John are being more conflicted there. That's what that means. Hmm. Yes. Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's based on it, but they don't always adapt everything from a book to a movie, right? Like it's more entertaining to change some aspects of it. But yeah, so like right now, like she's Hmm. Oh yeah, books are always better than the movie. I think there's only like one or two exceptions on that. I think Shawshank is the only exception. Um, so again, Steven's fire, right? Like this attraction is it's a fire, it's warmth. The lamp between them flickered at the onslaught of the storm, shuddering to the windows. Like there's conflicting, right? There's the warmth, there's the lamp, it's light. There's the storm, it's dark. They're battling each other right now. She rose to build the fire up again, and he followed her, right? He's fire. He's fire. He's warmth. For a long time, they stood closely to the stove, their arms almost touching. Once, as the blizzard creaked, the house she spun around sharply, fancying it was John at the door, but quickly he intercepted. Not tonight. You might as well make up your mind to it. Across the hills in a storm like this, it would be suicide to try. He's convincing her he's not going to make it. Her lips trembled suddenly in an effort to answer, to parry the certainty in his voice, then set thin and bloodless. She was afraid now, afraid of his face so different from John's, of his smile, of her own helplessness to rebuke it. To rebuke it. She doesn't like she finds him attractive. She's realizing like, she's in a bad spot. Afraid of the storm, isolating her alone with him in its impenetrable fastness. They tried to play cards, but she kept staring up at every creak and shiver of the walls. It's too rough a night, he repeated, even for John. Just relax a few minutes, stop worrying, and pay a little attention to me. But in his tone, there was a contradiction to his words, for it implied that she was not worrying, that her only concern was lest it might really be John at the door. Again, he's saying, "Oh no, don't worry. Like, John's not going to try. Like, don't worry, John's not going to catch us." That's what he's really saying here, right? Hmm. Like the book, like in the book, he's a lot more manipulative, right, than in the show. So, and the implication persisted. The implication is that don't worry, John won't catch us, right? It implied that she was not worrying, that her only concern was lest it really might be John at the door. So now she's worried he's actually going to come to the door, and that's why she kept looking at the door, right? So again, we might think that it's because she's worried, she's anxious, she wants John to get home. What we now know from the text is that she's worried John's going to come home. And the implication persisted. He filled up the stove for her, shuffled the cards, won, shuffled, still it was there. She tried to respond to his conversation, to think of the game, but helplessly into her cards, instead she began to ask, was he right? Was that why he smiled? Why he seemed to wait, expectant and assured? He's expecting John to not come. He thinks he's going to have her alone for the night. The clock ticked, the fire crackled. Always it was there. Furtively, for a moment, she watched him as he deliberated over his hand. John, even in the days before they were married, had never looked like that. Only this morning she had asked him to shave because Stephen was coming, because she was afraid to see them side by side, because deep within herself she had known even then. Known what? What had she known? So she's comparing them side by side. Deep within herself, she had known even then what. Yeah, she's known she's been attracted to Steven, right? That was why she wanted him to shave. Like she didn't want to remind her of how different they are. The same knowledge, furtive and forbidden, that was flaunted now in Steven's smile. You look cold, he said at last, dropping his cards and rising from the table. We're not playing anyways. Come over to the stove for a few minutes and get warm. You look cold. John is the cold. You're thinking about John. No, 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 no. Come over to the stove, which is me. Get warm. But mm-hmm, yeah, he is the antagonist. He's like in the text, like like in the movie, it was like, oh, it's things just got a little too far. They got a little too comfy. He's manipulative. Absolutely, he's very smart. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 So there's a lot going on here, right? The text gets really, really deep. But first, I think we'll hang blankets over the door. When there's a blizzard like this, we always do. It seemed that insane commonplace activity, there might be release a moment or two in which to recover herself from her lust right now from Stephen. John has nails to put them on. They keep they keep out a little of the draft. He stood on a chair for her and then hung the blankets that she carried from the bedroom. Then for a moment they stood silently, watching the blankets sway and tremble before the blade of wind that sprouted around the jamb. I forgot, she said at last, that I painted the bedroom door. She painted the bedroom door, right? At the top there, I've smeared the blankets coming through. He glanced at her curiously and went back to the stove. She followed him, trying to imagine the hills in such a storm, wondering whether John would come. A man couldn't live in it. Suddenly he answered her thoughts, lowering the oven door and drawn up their chairs, one on each side of it. He knows you're safe. It isn't likely that he'd leave his father anyways. Again, don't worry about the cold and John. He won't be here. Come by me. The wind will be in his back, she persisted. The winter before we were married, all the blizzards that had that year, and he never missed. Blizzards like this one, up in the hills, he wouldn't be able to keep his direction for 100 yards. Listen to it a minute and ask yourself. Again, the storm's getting worse and worse and worse as her feelings are getting more and more and more conflicted. His voice seemed softer, kindlier now. She met his smile a moment. It assured little twists of appraisal. Then for a long time sat silent, tense, careful again to avoid his eyes. She doesn't want to look in his eyes. She's at a breaking point. Everything now seemed to depend on this. It was the same as a few hours ago when she braced the door against the storm. He was watching her, smiling. She dared not move, unclench her hands, or raise her eyes. The fire cracked, right? The fire's roaring here. It's a huge fire. She's so attracted right now. She's about to break. The storm wrenched the walls as if to make them buckle in. So rigid and desperate were all her muscles, withstanding that the room around her seemed to swim and reel. So rigid and strained that for relief at last, despite herself, she raised her head and met his eyes again. Again, where was it? The storm wrenched the walls as if to make them buckle in. It's just like the storm's about to blow the house apart, right? This is the strongest the storm is. This is this is it. Everything depends on this. And what does she do? She gives in. She raised her head. Ooh, that's not what I meant to do. She raised her head and she looked into the eyes of Stephen. God. Intending that it should only be for an instant, just to breathe again, to ease the tension that had grown unbearable. But in his smile now, instead of the insolent appraisal that she feared, there seemed a kind of warmth and sympathy, an understanding that quickened and encouraged her, that made her wonder why, but for a moment, she had been afraid. It was as if the storm had lulled, as if she suddenly found calm and shelter. Oh, I feel calm now, like that. I'm looking at him again. He's warm. There's a fire there. Or perhaps the thought seized her. Perhaps instead of his smile, it was she that changed. Again, she spent the entire day thinking about her future, thinking about herself. She doesn't want to be alone. She who, in the long, wind creaked silence, had emerged from the increments of codes and loyalties to her unfettered self, from the codes and loyalties. She's married. She can't sleep around with someone. She has to be loyal to John. But now I can be myself. Is she thinking rationally though? She's not. She doesn't know what to think anymore, right? She's super confused. She's in a big moment of weakness. Hmm. After she did, yeah, afterwards she regretted it. So I really want to go into this quote here. So codes and loyalties to her unfettered self. So this whole thing here. So this right here is something of, we're gonna see this a lot. This is man, or like, man, woman. This is humankind versus self. So remember at the very start of the class, we talked about, we all have our little like internal demons. Like, for example, maybe you like alcohol a little bit too much. Um, Maybe there's always that urge. You've had to have that battle at some points. I need to go out and do this, or I could just, go out, have a beer, something like that, right? We've all had these types of instances where there's something we know we should or shouldn't do, but we give up in a moment of weakness. That's what it means to be human. So right here, codes and loyalties to her real unfettered self. She has to battle herself now. Do I remain loyal, or do I do what I want to do? She who now suddenly, oh yeah, yeah, it's been building up, right? Like for pages now, right? Like she dolled up, there's the fire, they keep getting close. Yeah. So she who now felt suddenly an air of appraisal, as if nothing more than an understanding of the unfulfilled woman that until this moment had lain within her brooding and unadmitted, reproved out of consciousness by the insistence of an outgrown routine fidelity. I'm sick of the boring same old life. I'm unfulfilled. Yeah. Yeah, like she's trying to convince herself now to take the plunge, right? To do it. To do it. Um, for there had always been Stephen. She understood now. 7 years, almost as long as John, ever since the night they first danced together. So what does it mean? There always had been Stephen for 7 years. She's always liked him, right? She's always had feelings for Stephen the entire time her and John were together. The lamp was burning dry, and through the dim light, isolated in the fastness of silence and storm, they watched each other. Her face was white and struggling still. His was handsome, clean shaven, young. Her eyes were fanatic, believing desperately, fixed upon him as if to exclude all else, as if to find justification. His were cool, bland, dropped a little with expectancy. What is he expecting? Yeah, he's expecting her. The lights kept dimming, gathering the shadows round them, husked, conspirational. He was smiling still. His hands were clenched up white and hard, but he always claimed, she persisted, the wildest, coldest nights, even in such a night as this, there was never a storm. Never a storm like this one. There was a quietness in his smile now, a kind of simplicity almost, as if to reassure her. You were out in it yourself for a few minutes. He would have 5 miles across the hills. I'd think twice myself on such a night before even risking one. So, um, this is it. This is her last stand, right? This is her doing that last convincing. He'll come, he'll come, he'll come. And then what does Steven do? Nope, he's not coming. So what do we think happens next? What was the scene that surprised us earlier? Yeah, yeah. All of a sudden they're playing cards. 1 second later, oh, they're naked. So long after he was asleep, she lay listening to the storm. As a check on the draft up the chimney, they had left one of the stove lids partly off. Uh, and through the open bedroom door, she could see the flickering of flame and shadows on the kitchen wall. They leaped and sank fantastically. The longer she watched, the more alive they seemed to be. There was one great shadow that struggled towards her threateningly, massive and black and engulfing all the room. Again and again it advanced, about to spring, but each time a little whip of light subdued it to its place among the others in the wall. Yet, though it never reached her, still she cowered. Feeling that gathered there was all the frozen wilderness, its heart of terror and invincibility. Then she dozed a while, and the shadow was John. Uh, inter, inter, minimally he advanced. The whips of light still flicked and coiled, but now suddenly there were the swift little snakes that this afternoon had watched twist and shiver across the snow, and they too were advancing. They writhed and vanished and came again. She lay still, paralyzed. He was over her now, so close that he could have touched him. Um, Already it seemed that a deadly hand was on her throat. She tried to scream, but her lips were locked. Stephen beside her slept on heedlessly. um, until suddenly, as it lay staring up at him, a gleam of light revealed his face, and in it was not a trace of threat or anger, only calm and stone-like hopelessness. Um, so again, like what was it? It was talking about this paragraph up here. There was one great shadow that struggled toward her threateningly, massively, and black and engulfing the room. Like we know that physically the shadow's John, but this means something, right? The huge thing that's coming up to get her is the realization that she just had an affair and the worry that John's going to find out. Oh, what did I miss? Uh, like, is that down here? Oh, I'm just trying to find the where that is on here. Do you know? Is it like on this paragraph here? Like right here? Or oh, here. Yeah. So yeah, he was so yeah, John was over her now, so close that he could have that she could have touched him, so that she could have touched John. Already it seemed that a deadly tightening hand was on her throat. She tried to scream, but her lips were locked. Stephen beside her slept on heedlessly, until suddenly, as she lay staring up at him, a gleam of light revealed his face, and in it was not a trace of threat or anger, only calm and stone-like hopelessness. That was like John. He began to withdraw, and she frantically tried to call him back. It isn't true, not really true. Listen, John. But the words clung frozen to her lips. Already there was only the shriek of the wind again, the saw on eaves, and the leap and twist of the shadow on the wall. Yes. So she sat up, startled now and awake, and so real that he had seemed there, standing close to her, so vivid the sudden age and sorrow in his face. She could not make herself understand that she had only been dreaming. Against the conviction of his presence in the room, it was necessary to insist over and over that he must still be with his father on the other side of the hills. Watching the shadows, she had fallen asleep. It was only in her mind, her imagination, distorted to a nightmare by the illogical and unadmitted dread of his return. Again, she was worried at the start, right? She was worried about him. She wanted him to come home. Now she's dreading that he comes back. But he wouldn't come. Stephen was right. In such a storm, he would never try. They were safe alone. No one would ever know. It was only fear, morbid and irrational, only the sense of guilt that even her newfound and challenged womanhood could not entirely quell. She knew now. She had not let herself understand or acknowledge it as guilt before, but gradually through the wind Tom silence of the night, his face compelled her. The face that had watched her from the darkness with its stone-like sorrow. The face that was really John. John, more than his features of mere flesh and bone could ever be. So again, now when she looks at John, what does she see now? We know she feels guilty. She knows now that she's guilty. And now when so now when she thinks of John's face, She's not like thinking of, like the skin in the bones and stuff like that. She's thinking about John. When she's thinking about John, John's now a symbol of something for her, right? It's stability. It's a partner. It's someone she, wants to love, someone who cares for her, someone who worships her. So she wept silently. The fitful gleam of light began to sink. Again, um, gleam of light. That's the fire, right? It's dying. That's Stephen. Her want of Stephen is dying. um, On the ceiling and wall at last, there was only a faint, dull, flickering glow. The little house shuddered and qualled, and a chill crept in again. Without waking Stephen, she slipped out to build the fire. It was burned to a few spent embers now, and the wood she put on seemed a long time catching light. Again, her wanton of Stephen has died. The wind swirled through the blankets they had hung around the door and stuck her flesh like laps of molten ice. Then hollow and moaning, it roared up the chimney again, as if against its will, drawn back to serve still longer with the onrush of the storm. For a long time, she crouched over the storm, listening. Earlier in the evening, with the lamp lit and the fire crackling, the house had seemed a stand against the wilderness, against its frozen, blizzard-breathed implacability, a refuge of feeble walls wherein persisted the elements of human meaning and survival. Now, in the cold, creeping darkness, it was strangely extinct, looted by the storm and abandoned again. She lifted the stove lid and fanned the embers till at last a swift little tongue of flame began to lick around the wood. Then she replaced the lid, extended her hands as if frozen in that attitude, still waiting. It was not long now. A few minutes she After a few minutes, she closed the drafts, and the flames whirled back upon each other, beating up against the top of the stove and sending out flickers of light again. A warmth surged up to relax her stiffened limbs. But shivering and numb, it had been easier. The bodily well-being that the warmth induced gave play again to an ever more insistent mental suffering. So again, she like played with the fire, and now she's suffering mentally. She remembered that the shadow that was John. She saw him bent towards her, then retreating, his features calm and overcast with unaccusing grief. She relived their 7 years together, and in retrospect, found them to be years of worth and dignity. Oops. Found them to be years of worth and dignity. So before she thought, she was wasting her life, but now she finds, she's happy about them. She's happy she lived those 7 years with John. Until crushed by it at last, seized by a sudden need to suffer and atone, she crossed to where the draught was bitter, and for a long time stood unflinching on the icy floor. Again, she doesn't want to be near the fire. She doesn't want to be near Stephen. She wants to be near John. So what does she do? She goes out, forces herself to feel cold. She's trying to atone for like her sins here. The storm was close here. Even though the blanket, she could feel a sift of snow against her face. The eaves sawed, the walls cracked. Above it all, like a wolf in howling flight, the wind shrilled, lone and desolate. And yet, suddenly, she asked herself, hadn't there been other storms, other blizzards, and through the worst of them, hadn't he always reached her? Clutched by the thought, she stood rooted a minute. It was hard now to understand how she could have deceived herself, how a moment of passion could have quieted within her not only conscious, but reason and discretion. She got caught up in the moment. She wasn't thinking straight. John always came. There could never be a storm to stop him. He was strong, inured to the cold. He had crossed the hills since his boyhood, knew every creek bed and gully. It was madness to go on like this, to wait. While there was still some time, she must waken Stephen and hurry him again. But in the bedroom again, standing at Stephen's side, she hesitated. In his detachment from it all, in his quiet, even breathing, there was this sanity, such realism. For him, nothing had happened. Nothing would. If she wakened him, he would only laugh and tell her to listen to the storm. Already, it was long past midnight. So we're about like 1 or 2 a.m., right? Either John had lost his way or not set out at all. And she knew that in his devotion, there was nothing foolhardily. He would never risk a storm beyond his endurance, never permit himself a sacrifice likely to endanger her lot or future. They were both safe. No one would ever know. She must control herself, be sane like Stephen. Page are we on? We're on 12. Perfect. For comfort, she let her hand rest a while on Stephen's shoulder. It would be easier were he awake now, with her sharing her guilt. But gradually, as she watched his handsome face in the glimmering light, she came to understand for him no guilt existed. So she's feeling ashamed. She's feeling awful. And then she looks at Stephen. He doesn't feel bad at all, right? Was not, we know it wasn't his first time, right? He's done this before. He doesn't care. So just as there had been no passion, no conflict, nothing but the sane appraisal of their situation, nothing but the expectant little smile and the arrogance of features that were different from John's. She winced deeply, remembering how she had fixed her eyes on those features, how she tried to believe that so handsome and young, so different from John's, they must in themselves be her justification. But he's so pretty and I like him. It's okay for me to do this. In the flickering light, they were still young, still handsome. No longer her justification. She knew now. John was the man, but wistfully still, wondering sharply at their power and tyranny, she touched them a moment with her fingertips again. So she knew John's the guy. She could not blame him. There had been no passion, no guilt. Therefore, there could be no responsibility. Suddenly looking down at him as he slept, half smiling still, his lips relaxed in the conscienceless complacency of his achievement, she understood that thus he was revealed in his entirety. All there ever was or could be, all he ever could be was a snake, right? John was the man. With him lay all the future. For tonight, slowly and contritely, through the days and years to come, she would try to make amends. I've realized my mistake. I want to be better. Then she stole back to the kitchen and, without thought, impelled by overwhelming need again, returned to the door where the drafts were bitter still. She's trying to suffer, making herself feel cold. Gradually, towards moment, the storm began to spend itself. The storm's growing tired. The storm's weakening. Its terror blast became a feeble, worn out moan. She's made up her mind. John's the man. And when she did that, the storm dies, right? The leap of light and shadow sank, and a chill crept in again. Always the eaves creaked, tortured with wordless prophecy. Heedless of it all, the clock ticked on in idiot content. They found him the next day, less than a mile from home. Drifting with the snow, he had run against his own pasture fence and overcome had frozen there, erect still, both hands clasping fast the wire. He was south of here, they had wonderedly when she had told them how he had come across the hill straight south. You wondered how he could have missed the buildings. It was the wind last night, coming in every way at once. He shouldn't have tried. There was a double wheel around the moon. She looked past them for a moment, and then as if to herself, she said simply, "If you knew him, though, John would try." It was later, when they had left her for a while to be alone with him, that she knelt and touched his hand. Her eyes dimmed. Still, it was such a strong and patient hand. Again, now she's like noticing all these redeeming qualities of him, right? She doesn't look at John and see a stupid guy. She sees someone strong. Then, transfixed, they suddenly grew wide and clear. On the palm, white ever against its frozen whiteness, was a smear of little paint. The paint of the bedroom wall. Oh, so it's a good short story, but it's really deep, right? There's a lot there. So we're pretty much near the end. So just for the next 5 minutes, I just want you to kind of go through, just like, take a look at what you've highlighted, find what you think are the most important things. We're going to be using this stuff tomorrow to construct arguments now. We're going to be using this as evidence now. Well, that's what we've kind of been doing here as we've been going through it. I'll make this available though to everyone as well. Like I don't even have everything highlighted here. Like there's so much you can do if you wanted. Oh, I need to pause my